covered a wide range of parts over a very long career, most of it extremely badly. I do a few things very well, but The Hat was merely incidental to the Avengers. It was a brilliant comedy.
In 1966, a British spy show aired a scene so provocative that censors cut 38 seconds from it before broadcast. The episode still drew the largest audience in the show's history. In America, the network refused to air it at all. But the real story behind the Avengers isn't just about one scandalous scene. It's about erased recordings, a forgotten star who drank himself to death, and a pay dispute that exposed exactly how little television valued the women who made it worth watching. The show that was built for someone else. Most people think of Patrick Macnee when they think of the Avengers. The bowler hat, the umbrella, the suit. John Steed. But the show was never built for him. The Avengers grew out of a cancelled series called Police Surgeon, which ran for 13 episodes in 1960 and starred Ian Hendry as a forensic doctor. When Police Surgeon folded, ABC Weekend Television kept Hendry and constructed a new show around him. He played Dr. David Keel, a man whose fiancée is murdered in the very first episode, setting him on a path of vengeance alongside a mysterious intelligence agent named John Steed. Hendry was the lead. Macnee was the sidekick. The billing reflected it. There were even 2 episodes in the first series where Steed didn't appear at all, because the show wasn't about him yet. The first episode, called Hot Snow, aired on January 7, 1961. It was shot live on videotape in the way most British drama was made at the time, which meant that once it aired, the tape was wiped clean and reused. This wasn't unusual. It was standard practice. ITV wiped tapes the way offices recycled paper. 26 episodes were produced for that first series, and almost all of them are gone forever. Only 3 complete episodes survive today, plus about 14 minutes of the pilot. An entire season of television erased. The origin of one of Britain's most iconic shows, reduced to fragments and audio recordings. Big Finish Productions eventually recreated the 24 missing stories as audio dramas, but the originals are gone. If the show's earliest era didn't actually hold up, nobody alive can prove it either way, because the evidence was taped over decades ago. Then, in November of 1961, the Equity Actors Union called a nationwide strike. ITV drama production ground to a halt. By the time the strike ended months later, Ian Hendry had made a decision that would shape both his future and the show's. He was leaving to pursue a film career. The sidekick was about to become the star. But if the equity strike had never happened, or if Hendry had stayed, would John Steed have ever become the character the world remembers? The woman who accidentally changed television. With Hendry gone, the producers needed a new dynamic for the show. They found it in an unlikely place. Honor Blackman joined in Series 2 as Dr. Catherine Gale, a widowed anthropologist with a judo black belt who trained at the Budokwai Dojo in London. She was strong, intelligent, and physically dangerous, and the reason for that had almost nothing to do with creative vision. Several of Blackman's early scripts were originally written for Ian Hendry's character. Rather than rewrite the dialogue to soften it for a female lead, the producers simply handed her the same lines. It was cheaper to put her in leather and let her throw punches than to pay a writer to start over. The result was a woman on British television in 1962 who fought, argued, and led scenes with an authority that female characters simply did not have at the time. It was accidental feminism, born out of budget constraints. But the audience didn't care why it worked. They just knew it did. Blackman received letters from women across the country telling her that watching Cathy Gale made them feel like they could stand up for themselves. The leather outfits became a cultural phenomenon. Blackman and McNee even recorded a novelty single together called Kinky Boots, which flopped in 1964 but became a top 5 UK hit when it was reissued in 1990. The song outlived the era that created it by nearly 3 decades. Then, in December of 1963, Blackman announced she was leaving. The reason was James Bond. Cubby Broccoli had cast her as Pussy Galore in Goldfinger, on the strength of what he had seen her do on The Avengers. Her final episode contained an in-joke about her character pussyfooting around on a beach, and a later episode had Steed receive a Christmas card from Mrs. Gale and wonder what she could possibly be doing at Fort Knox. She walked straight from one of Britain's biggest television shows into one of the biggest film franchises on Earth. But the gap she left behind needed to be filled, and the first attempt to fill it went badly wrong. The actress who was fired before she started. Before Diana Rigg, there was Elizabeth Shepard. Shepard was cast as Emma Peel and actually began filming. She completed roughly 1.5 episodes before the producers pulled the plug. Script editor Brian Clemens later explained that she simply lacked the sense of humor the role required. The footage was scrapped, and the search began again. Diana Rigg had never seen The Avengers when she auditioned. She was a stage actress with the Royal Shakespeare Company, performing classical theater by night, while the television world came calling during the day. She won the role from a screen test and stepped into a part that would define British pop culture for the rest of the decade. Rigg's Emma Peel was everything the show needed, and several things it wasn't prepared for. She was sharper than Steed in most scenes. She fought with a physicality that went beyond what the producers had originally intended. The show's stunt coordinator, Ray Austin, who had doubled Martin Landau in North by Northwest, secretly taught Rigg Kung Fu against the producers' wishes. They had insisted she stick to judo. Austin went ahead anyway, and Rigg reportedly became the first person to perform Kung Fu on British television. When the show sold to American ABC in 1965 for a reported $2 million, it moved from videotape to 35mm film. The entire production leveled up, and at the center of it was a woman who was about to appear in the most controversial scene in the show's history, and who the network was paying less than the man operating the camera. But that fight was still ahead of her. First came the scene that nearly pulled the show off the air entirely. 38 Sinful Seconds. The episode was called A Touch of Brimstone. It was written by Brian Clemens and directed by James Hill. Clemens first submitted the script in September of 1964, and it sat on a shelf for over a year because ABC program controller Brian Tessler was alarmed by what he read. The story involves a modern-day revival of the Hellfire Club, the real 18th-century secret society founded by Sir Francis Dashwood, devoted to excess, drink, and debauchery. Peter Wyngarde played the villain, the Honorable John Cleverly Cartney, a charismatic aristocrat who uses increasingly dangerous pranks on foreign diplomats to destabilize the British government. Before filming even began, the producers were forced to make concessions. A character's electrocution was made less graphic. A death by impalement on a broadsword was softened. Orgy scenes were toned down. A henchman's mutilation was rewritten so that his prosthetic hand is pulled from its socket rather than hacked off. And then came the centerpiece of the episode. Emma Peel, undercover at the Hellfire Club, appears as the Queen of Sin. She is dressed in a whalebone corset, a 3-inch spiked dog collar, and thigh-high leather boots. She is carrying a live snake. And in the scene's climax, Cartney whips her. When Rediffusion London received the finished episode, they demanded the whipping scene be shortened on the grounds of good taste. The Independent Television Authority agreed. The Daily Mirror ran a headline on February 18, 1966. Censored, Emma's 38 sinful seconds. How much of the whipping survived in the broadcast version is, even now, genuinely disputed. The Avengers dossier, the authoritative 1998 reference book, claims the scene was cut to a single lash. The fan archive dissolute.com.au says 2 strokes survived. Clemens himself recalled in 2000 that 4 or 5 lashes remained. Media historian James Chapman, viewing the uncut version released on home video in 1993, counted up to 12 cracks of the whip, but noted that at no point was the whip actually seen making contact. What is not disputed is the result. The episode drew an estimated 8.4 million viewers, the largest audience for any episode of The Avengers ever broadcast. It was the 5th most-watched program in Britain that week. Now here's the part most people get wrong. Nearly every retelling of this story claims the episode was banned in the United States. It wasn't. American ABC had purchased all 26 black-and-white Emma Peel episodes, but only had roughly 21 weeks in their schedule before switching to color programming. 5 episodes were dropped, and A Touch of Brimstone was one of them. 4 of the 5 had provocative content, but the 5th had nothing controversial in it at all, which undercuts the idea that censorship was the sole reason. The episode entered U.S. syndication without issue in 1969 and was later restored uncut for A&E in the 90s. The so-called American ban was a scheduling decision dressed up as scandal by decades of retelling. And that myth has been repeated so many times that most fans still believe it today. What is true, and what most people don't realize, is that the episode's influence traveled far beyond television. In 1979, writer Chris Claremont introduced the Hellfire Club into Marvel's X-Men comics, directly inspired by A Touch of Brimstone. The lead villain was named Jason Wyngarde, after Peter Wyngarde and his most famous character, Jason King. Emma Frost's Black Queen costume was modeled on Riggs' Queen of Sin outfit. One banned scene on a British spy show in 1966 quietly shaped one of the most iconic storylines in comic book history. But while audiences were debating what they saw on screen, something far more damaging was happening behind the cameras that the public wouldn't learn about for years. 90 pounds a week. After 12 episodes, Diana Rigg discovered what the production was paying her. It was 90 pounds a week. The cameraman operating the camera that filmed her was earning 120. The lead actress on Britain's most successful television export, the woman whose face was selling the show to over 100 countries, was earning less than the crew member pointing a lens at her. Rigg protested. She went to the producers and told them the pay gap was unfair. The response was hostile. She was called names she later chose not to repeat publicly. She asked for support from other women in the industry. None came. She asked Patrick McNee to back her up. He didn't. She eventually got her pay doubled to 180 pounds a week, and for her second series, it was tripled. But the experience left a mark. She later described being painted as greedy and difficult by the press, when all she had asked for was basic fairness. The schedules were brutal. Rigg was performing with the RSC at night and filming The Avengers during the day. The loss of privacy that came with sudden fame was disorienting. She had become an overnight glamour icon, and the discomfort of that transformation, combined with the pay fight and the grueling hours, made her decision to leave feel inevitable. She departed after 51 episodes and walked straight into On Her Majesty's Secret Service, where she played Tracy, James Bond's wife. The second Avengers lead to leave for Bond. If the show didn't actively push its greatest assets into leaving, it certainly made the decision easy for them. The replacement who nearly sank everything. Linda Thorson was 20 years old when she was cast as Tara King from a pool of roughly 200 candidates. She was inexperienced, visibly nervous, and stepping into a role that the audience had no interest in seeing anyone other than Diana Rigg play. The behind-the-scenes situation made everything worse. New producer John Bryce, experienced with videotape but not with film, took over the production and immediately ran into trouble. Shooting fell behind schedule. Early episodes were uneven. American ABC, which was co-financing the show, saw the footage and panicked. Brian Clemens and Albert Fennell were urgently recalled to rescue the production. Clemens had been pushed out at the start of the Thorson era due to internal politics at ABC, and he was brought back roughly a week and a half later when the scale of the problem became clear. A planned 90-minute introduction for Tara King was hacked down to a 50-minute episode with reshoots and visible continuity errors. The producers had chosen Thorson partly because she resembled Rigg, then immediately set about changing everything about her, starting with dyeing her hair. Tara was written as openly in love with Steed, a departure from the playful ambiguity that had defined the Blackman and Rigg eras. The chemistry that had made the show electric was replaced by something more conventional, and the audience could feel the difference. The show survived, but it never recovered its momentum. And while the production scrambled to keep going, the man who had started it all was already deep into a collapse that nobody was paying attention to. The first Avenger. Ian Hendry left the Avengers in 1962 believing he was headed for stardom. For a while, it looked like he was right. He appeared in The Hill alongside Sean Connery. He starred in Roman Polanski's Repulsion. He earned 2 BAFTA nominations. When Mike Hodges was casting Get Carter in 1971, he wanted Hendry for the lead role. The studio overruled him and chose Michael Caine instead. Hendry was given the supporting part of Eric Pace and reportedly carried his resentment of Caine throughout the production. After that, the work slowed. The drinking didn't. Hendry's second wife, actress Janet Monroe, was also an alcoholic. She died in 1972 at the age of 38. The loss devastated him, and his drinking accelerated. By 1978, the Inland Revenue had pursued him for unpaid taxes, and he was declared bankrupt. Roles dried up. He was fired from Jemima Shore Investigates for being unreliable on set. His final television work was on Brookside. In 1976, he guest-starred in a single episode of The New Avengers called To Catch a Rat. It was the first time he and McNee had shared a screen since the early 60s. At the end of the episode, Steed says a line to Hendry's character that acknowledged their shared history across both the show and real life. A farewell 17 years late. His last public appearance was in October of 1984 on Patrick McNee's episode of This Is Your Life. Hendry appeared visibly aged and unwell. The man who had once been the lead of the show was now a guest on a program celebrating the career of his former sidekick. 2 months later, on Christmas Eve, he died of a gastrointestinal hemorrhage at the age of 53. His 14-year-old daughter found him. His death barely registered in the press. American actor Peter Lawford died the same day and received more coverage. A benefit concert had to be organized just to cover Hendry's funeral expenses. The man who created the role that launched the franchise died, broke, forgotten, and alone. On the same day, the world was too busy celebrating to notice. What came after? Patrick McNee carried his own damage, even if he carried it longer. He had smoked 80 cigarettes and drunk a bottle of scotch every day for years before liver disease forced him to stop in the mid-80s. He came from money that evaporated. His father, a racehorse trainer, gambled everything away, and his mother left to live with a wealthy female partner whose family fortune paid for McNee's schooling at Eton, where he was reportedly expelled for running a bookmaking operation. He married 3 times. His second wife, Catherine Woodville, had appeared in the very first episode of The Avengers as the murdered fiancée whose death launches the entire plot. His third wife, Baba Majos de Nagazenye, stayed with him until her death in 2007. Off-screen, McNee was nothing like the buttoned-up steed. He was an enthusiastic naturist. Honor Blackman once claimed he invited her to play tennis in the nude. She declined. He appeared in A View to a Kill alongside Roger Moore, made a cameo in This Is Spinal Tap, and even showed up in the Oasis music video for Don't Look Back in Anger. He lived the back half of his life in California, became a U.S. citizen, and kept working steadily in smaller roles until his death in June of 2015, at 93. The New Avengers, the 1976 revival that was supposed to recapture the magic, collapsed under the weight of its own financing. It cost £125,000 per episode to produce at Pinewood Studios, and was funded through a shaky arrangement with a French company called IDTV and later a Canadian backer. When the French money fell through, the final 4 episodes were shot in Toronto with a local crew. Clemens himself disliked the results. ITV never gave the revival a consistent time slot. CBS in America, uncomfortable with the violence, buried it at 11:30 at night. Plans for a 3rd series were abandoned. Diana Rigg went on to one of the most distinguished careers in British acting, from Bond to Game of Thrones. She died in September of 2020 at 82. Honor Blackman died 5 months earlier, in April of 2020, at 94. McNee had preceded them both by 5 years. The Avengers erased its own origins, underpaid its greatest star, burned through every leading lady it had, and left its original creator to die in poverty, while the man who replaced him became a global icon. That's what it actually cost to look effortless. If this changed how you see the show, subscribe. The next one goes even deeper.